live right here, Monday, March 4th. Right now, in studio, very happy to welcome Steve Sosebee, the president and CEO of the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, one of my favorite organizations, one I've done countless events with. He's here in New York. It's a non-political, non-profit organization dedicated to helping heal the wounds of war and Palestinians who live under occupation. So, Steve, great to see you, my friend, in person.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks for having me.
You live, you were from Ohio. You're just a white guy from Ohio, started this Palestinian organization. And we'll go through the origin story in a second. But tell people a little bit about what does the PCRF do today?
So the PCRF was set up to respond to the humanitarian needs of Palestinian children all over the Middle East, and any child actually, not just Palestinian. Currently, we have three main areas that we're focusing on. First, we bring volunteer teams of doctors from all over the world, as far as Chile, New Zealand, North and South America, who volunteer their time and skills to come in and operate on kids with a variety of different kind of medical needs and conditions, and all the subspecialties that don't exist within the Palestinian health sector. We're the main and really in many ways the only organization on the ground doing that. We did 160 volunteer medical missions last year into Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon's refugee camps, and Jordan. We also bring injured and sick kids out for free medical care, mainly in the United States, who cannot get it within the local health system. We've brought already this year 5 or 6 kids who are amputees from Gaza as a result of gunshot injuries, in addition to kids with a variety of other types of medical conditions which can't be treated locally. And then we do a variety of humanitarian projects and programs, a sponsorship for kids with chronic conditions, a mental health program for kids in Gaza which are who are affected by post-traumatic stress, a lot of different other programs. Wherever we see children who are in need of care, we try to provide them services.
And recently you just opened up a new cancer center in Gaza. Tell us a little bit about this cancer center and why it was so important to open it.
Well, it's important for many reasons. First and foremost is the fact that children in Gaza, 100% of them had to travel outside for treatment, kids with cancer, leukemia, and other types of disease. And it was unsustainable. These kids were going abroad for care, that they were unable to go with their families. Their treatment was fragmented. The permit issue, getting permits to leave the Gaza Strip is a very challenging and complex process. And the results were that a lot of kids were not getting adequate care and in some cases even dying. Mm-hmm. And we as a relief organization have a responsibility to address these issues. We built a cancer hospital 5 years ago in Bethlehem in my late wife's name. And that was meant to be a national center for pediatric oncology in Palestine. Unfortunately, the majority of the kids in Gaza with cancer did not have access to those services due to the closure and restrictions on travel. So we brought those services to them and opened the first and only pediatric oncology department in Gaza, and completely privately funded by donors who gave $5 to thousands of dollars to make it possible.
And when you say it's difficult for the Palestinian children in Gaza to leave there to get medical care, what is the impediment?
It's not just children; it's people in general. So okay. It's a permit process. You have to apply for a permit to go outside of Gaza Strip.
And who do you apply to?
To the Israeli military.
Okay.
So you have to apply. You have to get permission to go. And in most cases, So, for example, in 2018, according to the World Health Organization, only 39% of people who applied were approved. Only
39%.
Yeah.
So 61% are not approved by the Israeli military.
Or have significant delays or don't have any approval. So this is a huge problem. And it impacts the health sector significantly there. And the end result is that people go without treatment or their treatment is delayed. And when you're talking about cancer, for example, you're on a very strict protocol. And if you don't get the treatment, the chemotherapy, or the follow-up care that you need in a certain time, everything that was done before could just completely fall apart and has no impact at all. So this is why we brought those services there, and we're very happy to be able to, have a positive impact in the lives of kids in Gaza, because half the population there are under the age of 16, and they're undergoing very challenging and difficult circumstances living in the Gaza Strip, as everybody knows.
Sure. Well, they sort of know. They really don't, because the American media, except for times of war, just don't cover it as much because there's not much to cover, or the media might not be allowed in. How often are you in Gaza?
I go once or twice a month.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
So what's going on? Share with us a little bit, like what's on the ground in Gaza now. There was, military actions not too long ago. I don't know what's rebuilt, what's not. Like, what's functioning? What's going on in daily life in Gaza?
So the last major conflict in Gaza, with sustainable one, if that's the right word, was in 2014, the summer of 2014. So over 55 days, there was fighting between Israel and the regime in Gaza, Hamas, which resulted in a huge number of civilian casualties. And destruction of infrastructure in Gaza. And the result was that much of the infrastructure was destroyed. They were talking about not only so-called military installations or whatever the Israeli legitimate targets of the local regime was, but also a lot of civilian targets and a huge number of civilian casualties. And that's just, you still see it all over Gaza. You still see the destruction, and occasionally there still is a flare-up of violence. But the overall impact has just been that there is no development. It's decreasing. I first went to Gaza in December of 1988, so I've been going there for over 30 years, and the unfortunate reality is that things are not improving. They're getting much worse, especially over the last year. We've been seeing now for a year now a weekly demonstration of the civilian population there who go to the border on Fridays and demonstrate, and in many cases suffering huge traumatic injuries as a result of gunfire coming from across the border. And that has a terrible impact on the health sector as well, because our organization is trying to develop the health services there
Sure.
to provide better treatment and sustainability. And when the population is there's a huge number of casualties every week, it's almost there's a collapse in the health sector. Even the WHO has warned that the health sector is on the brink of collapse in Gaza. So
It's heartbreaking to see, and you mentioned a little bit about children having PTSD, which I can only imagine. How widespread is that of the Palestinian children in Gaza, PTSD?
it's huge. There isn't a way to really measure it exactly,
Right.
but most professionals say that it's over 60%. And the situation in Gaza, there isn't a front line where there's a battlefield and so on. The battlefield's everywhere in Gaza, and children have been exposed since 2008 to 4 major kind of ongoing experiences to seeing violence and airstrikes and shelling, drone strikes and what have you, that have just, every neighborhood, every refugee camp's been impacted. So children have seen firsthand violence. They've experienced it firsthand. And, even for adults, it's hard for us to understand that kind of circumstance. But
Sure.
for a child, it's almost impossible for them to digest it. And then you add to it the challenges of living in Gaza with the poverty and the social circumstances. 95% of the water is undrinkable. 80% of the population there live in poverty, and 70% live on less than $2 a day. So the poverty, combined with the political circumstances, has had a tremendous impact, negative impact on the social circumstances that people live and grow up on there.
The cruelty of simply being in Gaza as a child or as a family, I can't even put into words. You're born into a situation about 1.2 million, 1.3 million people in Gaza.
2 million.
2 million?
Yep.
Wow, why did I think it was less than that? 2 million people in Gaza.
Yeah.
And from what I read, is it truly the most densely populated strip of land?
Yeah. It is one of the most densely populated, one of them. 70% are refugees from 1948. There's 8 refugee camps in the Gaza Strip, and poverty there is just immense. And unemployment's one of the most highly unemployed populations in the world. And people don't travel. Like, I have a staff of 15 field workers, social workers. 80% of them have never left the Gaza Strip in their entire life. So you have young people who've been their whole life is confined to this very narrow coastal strip, and with their world vision, it doesn't exceed the borders of, it's 42 kilometers long and 6 miles wide, and it's very hard for those people to have a hope in their life when they're
Right.
very confined in their ability to move.
I'm chatting with Steve Sosebee, the president and founder of the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, a great organization, non-political, non-profit organization that helps children, a great deal of them Palestinians. By the way, what is the situation in contrast the West Bank? Does it depend where you are in the West Bank?
It does, of course. The West Bank is obviously much different than the Gaza Strip. There's more freedom of movement, but there is, of course, a lot of restrictions on movement as well. It's more spacious, and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank has good relations, for the most part, with Western powers, unlike the regime in Gaza. Mm-hmm. So there's a better economic situation there. But still, people live under occupation, and people who live near Israeli settlements, for example, have very stressful lives. People who are, endure a lot of challenges, especially people who live inside of the West Bank town of Hebron, for example, where settlements are inside the populated areas. And there's a lot of checkpoints around which affect people's lives and impede them from traveling and moving around freely. So it really does depend on where you live.
My cousins live, my family's from Batir, outside of Bethlehem, but some live in Ramallah now. And last time I went there, I visited my cousin in Ramallah, and they live on a valley, but not like a big valley. Like, it's a little downwards. On top of the hill is where the settlements are. and they showed me where there's bullet holes in their house where the settlers just for fun would shoot down at the houses. And this is the world that my cousins live in.
It's the world I live in as well. Unfortunately, I live in the West Bank. So
have you had that situation? Have you had issues with settlers?
I mean, of course, you see them around, and I pass them. I haven't, fortunately, had any negative interactions with them because I live in Ramallah and I'm not able to really move very freely around. So no, I haven't. But obviously, I know a lot of people who have, and it's a very tense and adversarial relationship between the settlers and the Palestinian population there, and I don't see any opportunity for it to improve anytime soon.
So let's talk. I'm talking with Steve Sosebee. You started this organization. You're neither Palestinian nor are you Muslim. Not that you have to be. Palestinians are Christian and Muslim, but I think people would assume that was one or the other, that you would be connected to it by ethnicity or maybe religiously. Although Christians, there are a big Christian population in Bethlehem, of course.
And in Ramallah, where I live.
In Ramallah as well, and in Nazareth within Israel, in the north part up there.
Jerusalem as well.
And Jerusalem. So, and I think Christians should be moved by this. I think if you're a true Christian, at its essence is about caring for people in need. That's the teaching of Jesus Christ. So why did you start this organization?
Well, it's a human issue before it's a Christian or Muslim or Jewish issue. It's one that should appeal to every human being. And I was moved. I'm from Kent, Ohio, which, for people who can go back long enough, on May 4th, in 1970, National Guardsmen entered the university in a very small town. I was too young to remember, and killed 4 students protesting the Vietnam War. So being brought up in a small Midwestern town where that's your legacy and that's the historical context that you're very much aware of, I grew up with the kind of very socially conscious perspective on life. And the first Intifada began when I was in the university, and I wanted to understand and learn about why there was a conflict in the Middle East. I'm, of course, very sympathetic to what happened to the Jewish people in Europe and historically their persecution and how they've endured and survived. But it also, it was clear to me that what happened in Palestine was also created an unjust condition for the indigenous population there. And I think the only solution that would bring peace and security for the Jewish people and for the Palestinians is freedom and equality for everyone. Unfortunately, the occupation there is, creating a situation where there's an imbalance between the two sides. And I think until that imbalance is corrected, so everybody lives in peace and security, there's going to be conflict. I believe I'm an American, I'm a very proud American. The values that we have in this country of freedom and equality should apply all over the world. And I stand with anyone from any background, any religious perspective or ethnic perspective, anybody who's living without freedom. I stand with them and I work for them in a positive way with peace and love in my heart.
So that's why you started PCRF, to do something for justice.
I had the chance to go in December of 1988 with a student delegation to the West Bank, and I got to see firsthand with my own eyes what was happening on the ground there. It was very hard. It's very hard for anybody who's never been to the West Bank or to Palestine to really understand what the struggle is about or what the issue is. Unless you go there and experience it firsthand, you truly can never get a firm grasp on the issue. So I went as a part of a student delegation in December of 1988. For 3 weeks during our Christmas break, I got to see firsthand what was happening on the ground and how Palestinians were resisting occupation and, in many ways with comrades in Israel who were standing with them as well. And I was very much inspired by what they were going through. And I felt also as an American a certain sense of responsibility that, our government should be more aligned with bringing an end to the occupation. I went back and finished university and went back to work as a journalist in the first Intifada. I wanted to share the stories of people who I met on the ground there who needed to have their stories told. I think we as Americans, whatever perspective we have, knowledge and awareness is the first responsibility that we have on any issue, and being ignorant to what the Palestinians are going through isn't fair to them. I wanted to share those stories, and during the course of working as a journalist in the West Bank, I met a boy and a girl from Hebron who had been injured by a bomb. The boy was a triple amputee, and I wanted to help him. I arranged for him to come to Ohio, where I'm from, to get new prosthetic legs in 1990. I was just a kid at that time myself, early 20s, and When this boy came with his sister and they got free treatment and he got new legs and he went back home walking again, it inspired me to do more. I felt that, even though I'm just a guy from Ohio, I'm a working class kid, I could have an impact and do something. And I also knew that there's a lot of goodwill here in this country from people from all backgrounds and perspectives who want to help any child in need, whether they're Palestinian or what have you. And so I wanted to serve as a link between kids who needed treatment and hospitals and doctors who could treat them for free and communities who could take care of them. And that started the process.
And I know you're a nonpartisan organization, so what I'm going to ask you is about facts, not about partisan response here. But the Trump administration has, forget moving embassies, they've cut funding that was a lifeline for Palestinians to the UN Relief Works Agency, $300 million, I wrote about it, and $25 million to hospitals in East Jerusalem.
Yeah.
How does that impact
and another $200 million
in State Department infrastructure funds? Mm-hmm. How does that affect real life people? Like, for example, the cutting aid to the hospitals. And I quoted in my article there was, Christian leaders of that hospital, like Presbyterians, going, "Why is Trump doing this? This is where we treat these kids who have no place to go for care of these Palestinians."
Well, I'll let you explain why it happened from a political point of view, but I can tell you what the impact is.
Exactly.
So these are hospitals in East Jerusalem. There's 6 of them, which are the most specialized hospitals in Palestine. And historically, East Jerusalem was part of the West Bank before 1967. So these were institutions that have always been there to provide health services, more specialized health services that are otherwise available in the occupied territories. After 1967, there's been a process of separating East Jerusalem from the West Bank to where it is now completely separate. And the only access that people have is, in most cases, to get accepted for treatment. So the specialized services that exist in East Jerusalem don't exist in the West Bank or Gaza Strip. We're talking about radiation therapy. So even for the pediatric oncology departments that we've built in Bethlehem and in the Gaza Strip, we built 2. Neither of them can provide radiation therapy services for kids with tumors, for example, because we're not permitted to bring radiation machines into these institutions by the Israeli army. So those services exist in East Jerusalem. So patients who need radiation therapy, for example, can only access East Jerusalem Hospital. So East Jerusalem hospitals depend on this support to be able to sustain their services. And the impact that it's having is tremendous in a very negative way. Because those hospitals don't have any more of the resources to continue to provide these services. In the case of radiation therapy, for example, the U.S., I know 1,000 women in Gaza who've been flagged for follow-up care after having mammography tests done, and they've been flagged like you need to have another test done. They've been denied access for care. There's no opportunity for them to go forward and get the next stage of treatment. That's 1,000 women. And that's almost a death sentence for many of them. And already they live under extreme conditions, and you just further complicate that by denying them access to treatment. And it's all of these hospitals in East Jerusalem provide a variety of different, whether it's ophthalmic services or open heart surgery, cancer treatment, and dialysis for children. Those services aren't otherwise available. So you're basically denying people treatment and health care in the name of the United States.
Are you at all hopeful about the situation there going forward? As a human, not a political remedy or a political solution, but for the people there? Or is it just going to stay the same unless something fundamentally changes?
Of course, it's going to stay the same until something fundamentally changes. Unfortunately, there's no light at the end of the tunnel from a political point of view, but I'm a human being, and I believe justice always prevails. And the only thing that inspires me is living there and seeing firsthand the courage and the humanity of the Palestinian people, and how determined they are to be free, and to they treat always me and all of the foreigners that we bring in to volunteer and support them from a humanitarian point of view. They treat them with such kindness and openness and hospitality, even though in many cases our governments and our countries are responsible for their plight and their suffering. It's that element of humanity and courage and dignity that every day the Palestinians show the world and show me firsthand gives me hope that there will be one day freedom and equality for everyone there, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and there will be peace in the Holy Land. But we're far from that now, and we need leaders who can demonstrate some level of courage and humanity to back up our foreign policy and do the right thing.
Well, you're here in the States now, but you actually live there in Palestine, in the West Bank.
I do.
Where do you live? Ramallah, right?
Yeah, well, Beira, but it's Ramallah.
Oh, Beira. Okay. So last thing, if people, because you're a not-for-profit, I've been at Fundraisers, it's a great organization. If you wanted to, if people are listening and they go, I want to help this organization, what's the website? Where can they go?
It's www.pcrf.net. And we are 100% privately funded, so we don't get any government funding from anyone, and we depend on the goodwill of people who want to see a very transparent and effective organization use their money to change lives.
And I believe you guys get the highest rating in terms of Charity Navigator, transparency.
7 straight years, 4-star rating.
So if you're looking for, because there are people who listen and they're moved and they want to help out, and there's different ways of doing activism. One is listening to this show, but others ways is actually making donations to an organization like PCRF. It's PCRF.net, and it's a fabulous organization. Steve, I want to thank you for your time for coming in the studio here, because you happen to be in New York right now because they're going to start a chapter here in New York. But thank you for your amazing work. It has changed lives. You've saved lives. You've given countless Palestinians hope in a time of hopelessness, frankly. So what you're doing is beautiful. It's the best of humanity come to life. So I want to just say thank you to that.
That's very kind of you to say that, Dean. I'm truly honored to serve this cause. I believe it's a human cause of dignity and courage. And any human being who believes in justice and freedom and equality should support the Palestinians.
Well put, my friend. Thanks very much, Steve. So, folks, we're going to take a break. We'll come back, the Dean Obeidallah Show, with more right after this. SiriusXM Progress 127. Look, it's time the media start calling out Trump's false statements for what they are. Lies. Trump's a liar. And by the looks of it, he's lying every day and twice on Sundays.
The Dean Obeidallah Show.